Ladies and gentlemen, citizens, meatbags, welcome to Interlinked, the official Neo Tokyo podcast. And we today are very excited to be joined by Mr. Marco from Merit Circle Beam. How's it going, man?
Yeah, all good, man. How are you doing?
Oh, doing amazing. Another day in paradise. Crypto gaming's popping off. Here we have our co-hosts, Mr. Nick Cryptotheus, as well as Mr. Jared Hogshead Cheese. Welcome, gentlemen,
What's up, guys?
citizens.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, stoked to be here.
What's up, crypto gamers? Huge shout out to our sponsor, Playa3ull Games. They are inspired by gamers and funded by their community. They have a epic game on the Epic Games Store, a third-person shooter called Nexus. Hop on in there and check that out. They're also currently selling nodes, so if you're interested, check that out at their website, playable.games. That is a 3 instead of a B on Playable. Now strap in for the rest of this episode of Interlinked.
Awesome. Okay, guys. Well, let's get down to it. I know we want to just jump right into the good stuff. Marco, would love to just learn everything about you and Merit Circle and Beam. Let's build the foundation. Let's make it super in depth. Let's just jump right in.
All right, let's do it. Where do you want to start? Do you have any specific questions? Like, should I start by introing myself? I think that's probably a good way to go. So, yeah, my name is Marco van den Heuvel. I'm one of the co-founders at Merit Circle. Very often described as spider in the web because I like to just keep busy what needs to be done on the Merit Circle side. I mainly, have a background on the gaming side where I've always been a diehard gamer. And I've been investing in the cryptocurrency industry since 2017. First, just, like a normal person coming in, not knowing much about crypto, diving into the rabbit hole with BTC and ETH. But it actually very quickly went into the rabbit hole of gaming when I learned, about Axie Infinity, Illuvium, and some other of the early starters in Web3 gaming, I would say. And yeah, nowadays I'm 100% focused on Merit Circle, and it's been an absolute wild ride. If I were to describe Merit Circle in a nutshell, I would say it's a Web3 gaming DAO, 100% focused on gaming. We started off mainly focused on the gaming activity side, but nowadays I would more describe it that we're very heavily focused on the infra side. To explain that in a nutshell, we have 4 pillars that we work around, which could be described as investments, because we have done a lot of investments in the name of the DAO for different or in-game different game studios and infrastructure companies. We have, of course, the gamers, where we're still very actively, trying to build a community of gamers that are excited about the games that we work with that, are now really coming into early access mode, I would say, since this year. We have the infrastructure side where we have, mainly Beam. I think some people might know us more under the name of Beam these days than Merit Circle, which obviously has blown up in a great way with many state game studios now building onto it. And we have the studio side where we have actually co-launched one of our own studios together with Studio Ducklands for Forgotten Playlands. So yeah, very excited to be here today. I'm sure we'll do plenty of deep dives. So I'll stop there for now.
Definitely. Yeah, I wanna do the deep dives. We have some time for long form discussions here. So let's get out of the nutshell. We don't want to be stuck in the nutshell. It's way too small for people. So let's jump out of that. And yeah, I would love to just kind of hear, like, how did it start? What was what was like the incubation period? How did that really get going? Because you guys have gone from basically starting this project to, like, now you have a multi-$100 million treasury. You have incredible infrastructure. You now have, you're partnered with some of the top other gaming giants in the space, like Immutable and Polygon. You guys have an amazing partnership there, which I want to dig into a little bit later on. But how did it all start? What was the origin story there?
Yeah, so the origin story, I would say, starts on my end. So when I briefly mentioned Axie Infinity and Illuvium, that's where it all started, because I was actually one of the early investors in Illuvium. And that was right around the time where Axie Infinity became very, hot under the masses. It was booming. The ecosystem was booming and popping off. And I always been a gamer, so I played RuneScape back in the day, and I would find myself be more busier with the ecosystem and the marketplace than the actual gameplay itself. And when I played Axie Infinity for about a week and I learned about their breeding mechanism and their whole economy, I was like, wow, this is pretty fascinating, because I understood this from back in RuneScape. And now I'm seeing it here happen in real time, but with real money. So I kind of went in and I put in quite a bit of my savings to just become one of the breeders in the ecosystem. And that just exploded, I would say, in a positive way around late 2020, early 2021. And then, I didn't really do anything with that because I was mainly focused on my consultancy business, doing community management and marketing for crypto companies. And when at some point they migrated to Ronin, I was like, wow, now it's even more booming. And we saw kind of the guilds popping up. And that's where I realized there's actually something interesting here. And I got back in touch with Mark and Tommy, who are now the other two co-founders at Merit Circe. They had just started their private fund, and we were chatting, and I was telling them about, what kind of figures Axie Infinity Guild that I was kind of doing on the side was pulling off after just doing it for a couple of weeks. And we were like, wow, this is actually interesting. And I think that it can go beyond just Axie Infinity. And late 2021, so this was all happening right around August 2021, I would say. Late 2021, around October, we were thinking, the play to earn model is cool, but it's not really sustainable. We do want to create a model on the guild side that is a DAO that's much more transparent, where you can see what is actually happening with the treasury. We also want the token to be the core aspect of that whole, value accrual and economy in that project, so that everyone knows and understands, okay, this is how it's happening, this is how it's done. And that, was an idea that came to life in a very short time span of, I would say, a couple of weeks, where BTC was above 60K, gaming was still booming. We pitched a couple of VCs, and they were very receptive of the idea of taking this beyond the play to earn ecosystem towards gaming, Web3 gaming as a whole, especially with the games like Illuvium now starting to kind of tease actual game footage, whereas, back then there weren't a lot of games live yet, so it was all still very theoretical, I would say. But yeah, late 2021, that whole public treasury round happened, raised, I think, $105 million in total. And we immediately pivoted from that whole guild model to a DAO model that we found is much more sustainable, and that the DAO found much more sustainable, which was going back to our roots, which was what we knew best, was investments and gaming, but not deploy all of it into Axie Infinity scholarship that was back then still going. So that's how it all started. And fast forward, like I said, we pivoted from Merit Circle to Beam, because nowadays we're no longer that scholarship guild, that gaming focused ecosystem in terms of the actual game activities. We are much bigger than that. We have the investments going for us. We deployed quite a bit on that end, but we always had the excitement and energy to actually build something for the ecosystem that both gamers and developers could use. And I would say, based on the feedback that we have gotten by working with different game studios throughout the past 2.5 years, we learned that a lot of them are not sure about what blockchain do I actually want to use. And I think when we realized that, and when we started learning about, okay, but what do they want on the Web3 side that could enable them to focus on actually building the game, and us to kind of take their hands on the Web3 side, that's where Beam came to life. So yeah, I really want to urge again, the origin story is, I like talking about it because it's still, that's what sparks my energy, is the gaming, because I go back to my gaming roots. But what we do today is a complete shift from that to something that, in my opinion, is even much more exciting, because now we're actually contributing into, on the tech level for those game studios.
So if I heard right, basically you've been a gamer for a long time. I think you mentioned RuneScape, and you saw what was going on with Axie. You dove in. You started to see what revenue potential was there from the scholarship model. And just to clarify for the audience, for those of you who may not be familiar, at least my understanding of the scholarship model, and Margo, please correct me if I'm wrong, but you would basically find this scenario where you as an investor would have some capital and you would buy into the NFTs or you would buy assets, but you wouldn't necessarily have the time to go and deploy and playing and juicing those assets or generating yield from those assets. Whereas other people would have a lot of time, but they didn't have capital. And so the people who had time wanted to play and earn, and the people who had the capital wanted to invest and earn. So it was a perfect synergy where the people who had the assets would essentially rent or lend those assets out to the players who would then play and earn, and a share of there would be a rev split between the lender and the borrower. And so the lender would obviously get to make their money, the borrower would get to make their money without having to put up the capital, and everybody was happy. And that kind of kept going as long as more people came into the ecosystem and more fresh capital was coming in. But at some certain point in time, there weren't enough people to come in to support the earnings. And so that kind of that forced a lot of pivoting from a lot of different companies. And that's how we kind of got into this whole like, oh, PDE's dead. And, maybe in the West, it's a little more prevalent to say that, but the East, it's kind of still going on. So, just to kind of summarize there, that seems like kind of where you guys saw that was going on. You pivoted to more of the DAO structure and you started to make investments. And then now you've gotten into the ecosystem and the infrastructure side. I guess the point where I think everybody would love to know is you guys raised 105 million back then. Your treasury is bigger now than it was back then, but we just went through one of the most horrendous bear markets of in crypto's history. We may still be in it. I don't know. Time will tell. How did you guys preserve your capital while still be able to make investments and be able to devote enough resources to keep the operation going and to be able to build out all this amazing infrastructure that is now turned into Beam? Like, how did you guys pull that off? Because it's pretty amazing during that time period, given what was going on there.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think a lot of people are wondering that. I think to me, in essence, that goes back to the mandates that the community had created as a proposal for the DAO way back in the beginning. I think when this whole treasury round happened, BTC was like 60K, like I said. And so obviously that whole market sentiment went down, and we were looking at it from a normal perspective in terms of, okay, you want to be able to work with this money and not just throw it out of the window. So how are you going to hold that? And to us, that answer was very simple. You mainly want to hold it in USDC because it's a stable coin. It preserves, in essence, capital and enables you to think about how are you going to actually deploy that. I would say when in the beginning, this whole narrative was still going on, capital was deployed relatively fast in investments because the go-to market strategy for a lot of those game studios was very short-term oriented. And like I said, back then, we still had that focus on the gaming side and we had an active community to use our NFTs. So it made naturally sense. At the same time, we also realized that, we are here for the long term. Anything that we do is focused on the long term, not on the short term. And that's also why I talked about the transparency earlier on. You can see how we have been doing things. And this mandate basically talked about in the treasury, an X amount of money needs to be in stables, an X amount of money can be deployed in investments. If you do investments, an X amount of money can be deployed in a single investment. If it's above that, you have to create a proposal to also make sure that it's like pretty diverse. And I would say also on our own side and with our own side, I go back to kind of the roots with Tommy, Mark, myself, and the early DAO contributors that were there. We were all saying, the short-term horizon isn't looking great. And we want to keep building. So how can we do this most efficiently? And so I think that that's something that we did really well during the market. I think, obviously on the investment side too, there were write-offs and we have done that. We had the monthly treasury reports. Now that's quarterly because it just makes more sense from a overhead perspective, I would say. There's a lot of time and energy put into those. It showed that, like with normal startups, some game studios might fail, but there's also winners that, make up for that. And I think at the point where we deployed around 30 or 40% in the investment side, we were like, okay, this is a very good foundation to grow from, to grow a network from, to really learn from all the game studios. How is this, look inside the kitchen? How is this going from early game development on to go to market? What are their needs? What are their challenges? what kind of games are becoming interesting in the ecosystem, but also what game economies are interesting and what NFT models are interesting. I think that has given us so much information and knowledge that we have been able to use to our advantage to, remain sustainable, keep the treasury very healthy, again, thanks to the community and the proposals that were created early on. And now look forward to, okay, we built some really cool stuff. Now we're finally getting to the point where games are shipping. We launched Beam mainnet. We have launched the SDK with all the tooling. Yeah, this is a very exciting moment for us to really get into the action, I would say.
I love this topic because I think treasury management is something that is very underspoken about, particularly when we were in that blow off top phase where nobody was talking about that. And that ended up being one of the determining factors of like what projects survived, which projects died. You know, if you were just moonboying and just like rolling things into like gain after gain after gain, a lot of those projects didn't make it, or certainly at least needed a cash infusion. Curious if you took any of that USDC and took it all the way back to like fiat USD and sort of building off that, if you remember the USDC depegging and sort of how you manage that as a company. Because, you know, I had a decent chunk of USDC and I just remember being like, do I jump to Tether and take a 10% hit? Do I ride this out? Do I go to USDC, like USD? It was a scary time.
Yeah, that was a very, very scary time, I would say. But I think then here too, there's a really good diversification between BTC, ETH, USDT, USDC. We actually also had UST. I would say we've weathered quite some storms with, FTX blowing up. The DAO had some funds there back then, but obviously was already pulled before that collapsed because we were like, we try to keep everything on chain because again, transparency mandates, and that's how it's used. But sometimes you need to have some money on an exchange to, for example, wire for an investment. So that was for practical purposes. I'm very happy that we've weathered those. I always knock on wood because we've weathered those storms really well. UST, FTX, the USDC DPAC. I think all of those moments where we were looking at it from a perspective of, okay, for example, the USDC one, what is the scenario really like? Is this it happened in the weekend? So we knew that, that whole with Circle, the money transfers were not active in the weekends from fiat back to USDC. So we knew there would be like some short-term volatility and supply risk. There was the question, is this USDC actually properly backed or is it air? I think USDC had a lot of information available that showed you it is actually backed. So for us, that gave us the confidence to say, okay, we have a well-diverse treasury. We know the risk that is here. Are we taking a haircut? Are we, waiting this out? For us, that ended up being waiting it out because the price of the USDC, I think, was around 0.88, like 88 cents or 89 cents back then. And we looked at, okay, realistically, if there is this gap, then the fair value, I believe, was set around 82 cents. So then the risk reward side for the DAO there would be that, it's very likely that it goes back to $1. There are the mandates that we always operate around. So we knew exactly how much could be in USDC and how we would want to weather this storm in this case. That went really well. I think treasury preservement, I think moments like these, they are the risks of being in cryptocurrency and being an on-chain DAO where you want to be fully transparent. We don't take back fiat to the bank because of the transparency that we want to keep and maintain, and also because taking it to bank is pretty much centralized as well. Whereas again, we're in essence we are a DAO. So we operate around those mandates and they don't state that, we can just take it to the bank and keep it there and farm some yield there. That would require an additional proposal where people maybe say, hey, bonds are yielding nicely right now. Maybe you want to deploy some there. That would require a proposal that has not been done to date.
That's great. I mean, I think it's a wonderful example of how if you don't have, I think Ray Dalio would call them principles, or if you don't have rules going into these things, it's really easy to get lost in the chaos and you're just shooting from the hip trying to make decisions. where, if you have those sort of guidelines or those mandates to fall back on, it can be really helpful during those crisis periods.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, anytime people ask us about how is the treasury managed, how are the investments managed, I am really happy that we just, have that transparency from the early days on. I think that accountability, the credibility is super important. I mean, trust is great, but verify. And one of the few things that I kept seeing in industry with a lot of doubts is that transparency is not where I would like to see it. So then in this case, with the DAO, with the community, I think we're taking the lead by example approach by doing this transparently, which also by the way, isn't always the easiest route to take. Because I think if you are a DAO, you want to have a really great balance between how can you do this on the daily operations side with all the core contributors versus what do you require, what requires a proposal. And in this case, by having this done through mandates that very clearly, lay out how you can do things in the day-to-day, make it easy for that to happen. But if every single action that would be taken would require a vote, that also wouldn't work. But then, like I said, to go back to the trust and verify, I think that's where all the documentation, all the reports, all the information that we share kicks in.
So I want to kind of take us more from the past and kind of get us into the present now. You guys obviously went from being the investment DAO and now breaking into the tooling and infrastructure side with Beam. Maybe you can talk just a little bit about like how you came to that conclusion. And we've had an AMA in the past where I think it was Mark who kind of talked a little bit about like how you actually did it, from hiring the devs to seeing what worked and what was going on from the investment side, and then just kind of building out what you thought the market needed. But maybe you can just kind of highlight some of that. Just give us kind of the TLDR there, just for the sake of the context on the pod. And then, would love to just kind of talk a little bit more about that once we establish that context.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, earlier on, I mentioned that a lot of what we do today is based on the feedback that we have gotten throughout the past 2.5 years. I think for us, when we realized that the majority of the game studios, their skill is in building games. Their skill is not necessarily in picking a blockchain, thinking about all of the elements and aspects that fit that, because building a community, doing the marketing, figuring out tokenomics, figuring out the NFT model, that's a lot of things that go beyond just gameplay. And that's where our skill is. And so when we've worked with those different game studios, it wasn't just us figuring out, hey, what are we going to do now? What might be our product market fit? It came naturally because we kept being asked by those studios, maybe you want to take us a little bit more on the hands on that Web3 side so that we can focus more on that game development and, hit our development milestones there. And, initially Beam, I would say we had some ideas. But when we saw on Avalanche, the DeFi Kingdoms folks having a subnet and how that worked with the tooling, with the communication, with the opportunity of basically creating subnets connected to that, the subnets connected with each other to get a little bit technical, where you don't have to deal with bridging. If, for example, a game gets really big on a subnet and you get to the point where the transaction fees are very expensive because of that one game, that probably means that game is successful because they have a lot of transactions happening on their, on the blockchain. And at that point, what was cool, Avalanche was the first with the subnets being live in action. You could say, I will spin up my own dedicated environment. It connects with another subnet so that I don't have to do the bridging like you would have, for example, from Ethereum to Avalanche or from Avalanche to Polygon. And I can do this in my own dedicated environment with my own tooling. But to spin that up, it's quite costly, and it would take quite some development work to build all of the tooling from scratch. If you think about, for example, a marketplace for NFTs, if you think about an AMM, etc. But we saw when DeFi Kingdoms was scaling, to a lot of transactions, how this worked in action. And we thought, this is very cool, but maybe not just for one game. What if you build an ecosystem where multiple game studios can come in, They kind of share the network effects of player liquidity where people want to try out different games within that ecosystem. They have everything in one ecosystem so they can just use, one place to log in where they can manage their NFTs and play them, if there's interoperability, play them across games, but find everything in one place. And at the same time, we wanted that to take it to the point where it's not Web3 in your face, where you have to learn about seed phrases, private keys, MetaMask, all of those connections. It's in a way that goes back to gaming, back to social logins, so account abstractions, smart contract wallets, basically, that allow you to use your or manage your NFTs through social logins like username, password, or email, etc., and play the games like you normally would. And I think when we slowly started talking with game studios about those ideas, they were very interested. And we already had a couple of signups for games that wanted to go down this rabbit hole with us if we were to do this, to see, basically be a great case study to see, okay, this is the tooling that you would actually need. We will build it for you. You come in that ecosystem and we see together how this is going to work. And Mark, yeah, definitely explained that pretty well in the different AMA, I would say. He's mainly been in the lead on it from the beginning. He's also a bit more technical than I am. I go back to the gaming roots. But I think for everyone within the DAO, it clicked. Like, okay, this is cool. This is like the direction that we would like to see Web3 gaming go into, where it goes back to gaming rather than gamified DeFi experiences, if you will. And I think that Q1 2024, we're going to see a lot of the games that we signed up so far for Beam go and actually deploy on Beam and go into action. I think that's the exciting times in my head, where it goes from those conversations and ideas to actually seeing it all happen. We already have a couple of games that now deployed their NFTs there, deployed their token there. But I think, like I said, the real action with more games doing this is going to happen around Q1. Yeah, for us right now, it's, Beam, and I'll, stop me if I'm going rambling too much, but where it's going right now is basically we had announced recently the collaboration with Immutable zk-EVM. If I look at Beam today, how I would explain it, it is a toolkit for game developers and for gamers. And in that toolkit, one of the things that you have is the Avalanche subnet. And that Beam subnet is something that we are going to continue to focus on heavily, because that is basically our own ecosystem where we really take those studios by the hand on the tech side and can really work closely with them. Whereas the zk-EVM by Immutable is an expansion of the other tools that we have that go from, mainly the NFT marketplace, the account abstraction that I talked about. We're going to integrate Immutable Passport, Immutable Order Book on the marketplace that is 100% focused on gaming as well, and customized gaming experiences where the marketplaces can be on our general domain, a custom domain for a game studio, or in the game directly, which is, ultimately what we as gamers want to see. But it's an expansion on what we have there. And, I think Immutable and Polygon have done an amazing job. I think they have, between the two now, 70% market share of the games, building in Web3, which is a massive number. And that expansion for us is like, we are like-minded in where we see Web3 gaming going. So it was a very natural, I would say, conversation that, again, Mark was here also largely in the lead, but I've gotten to learn so much throughout the past, couple of months while those conversations were happening. And that clicked in my mind as well, where it's like, if you're a game studio that wants to work with us, where we're really your tech party, then, maybe the subnet is for you. If you're already, if you are already thinking about building on, for example, Polygon or Immutable, then the zk-EVM is very interesting because you have Polygon technology under the hood. Then you have the largest Web3 gaming platform, which is Immutable. And then you have the largest Web3 gaming DAO, which is Merit Circe. It's a really great collaboration where we can work together on, like what I thought, getting the blockchain elements, the enhancements of the gaming experience in the games directly itself. Yeah, I'll stop there for a minute because I've been just rambling about all of this. Yeah.
I love that. And by the way, we're in long form. We're in the long form zone here. So, all ramblings are encouraged and greatly appreciated. But just to quickly summarize, then I want to hand it over to Jared for a second. I think you had a question. So basically, you guys started out as this investment DAO. You saw what was going on in the marketplace. You saw that some games just wanted to focus on the Web 2 side and wanted to hand off the Web 3 tech side. So you guys built on the Avalanche subnet. And that is Beam as the chain, if you will. So games will come to you, you become their tech partner, really white glove service, and you help them basically bring their games to market. And we're going to see a lot of those in Q1 of 2024 and beyond. Of course, you guys have been doing an amazing job with your BD efforts, with your PR. I think everybody has a really favorable thought of you in the marketplace. Like your reputation is really good. And then on the side of the partnership with Immutable and therefore Polygon, seems like a lot of the tools that you built for Beam, you now are taking that off of the subnet. It'll still exist there, but like some of the things that have worked really well there, you're now taking that and bringing that omni chain to where basically anybody in the gaming world that's interacting with Immutable or Polygon can leverage these tools, and it'll all work very seamlessly. Like, for example, the marketplace, where just from what I was reading, it could be an in-game marketplace very akin to like a World of Warcraft auction house, where everybody can kind of go to this one place. They have the different order books and the different auction houses and the places in the marketplace, and everything is kind of like one grand exchange where it's all bunched together. So different games and players on different games and different projects can all kind of interact with each other through the marketplace, and it works very seamlessly integrated with all the existing tech. Is that kind of a good summary of the three pillars of what you guys have built so far?
Yeah, I think that's pretty well explained. I think, to add on to the marketplace side as well is obviously, with a lot of games, I want to see it directly in the games. I think that's great. There might also be games that say, I don't want it directly in the game. I might want it on my own custom domain, like I said. I think the really cool thing about Sphere is that basically it also acts semi as a self-serving platform where you don't just have a white page with an NFT and the rarities. You can take ownership of that page by really adding that game experience to the marketplace. So you can read about the game lore if you want. You can see in-game footage, you can see trailers, you can add, a lot of information that speaks to the gamer that is navigating the marketplace, maybe figuring out which sword might be best for me. And how amazing would it be if you could see this sword was earned from this monster on this and this date at this time. And it was actually, by the way, the X number of swords that they actually got into the game. I think is really cool. So when I go a bit deeper in that, one of the things that I was fascinated by earlier this year was at GDC, which was March, back in March, we had MapleStory announcing that they were going to build on Polygon. And I played a little bit of MapleStory back in the day, not too much, but one thing that stuck to me was in MapleStory, the Web2 variant, if you will, they were walking against the wall with one issue, which was supply. There had been, new content created, but obviously some of the content that used to be new and rare, where you had very legendary items, used to be very rare, are now pretty common because more and more people got to slay those monsters. And so one of the things that they're adding with the Web3 components is a daily maximum of how much of this legendary item could be dropped in the game. That kind of throws back to what I just talked about with the sword in the marketplace. How amazing if you can see, hey, this was actually the first sword that was ever dropped from this monster in the game. Oh, and by the way, this sword is actually also used to defeat X and X monster, boss in the game. I think that, to me, as a gamer, excites me. It just takes me back to those RuneScape experiences, to those MapleStory experience, to World of Warcraft, where I'm like, this would have been cool if it was there back in the day. I think the other thing to kind of round it up is with the whole Beam SDK and the tooling that we built. One of the things that I recently said in the Bankless episode was we want to be where the gamers are and we want to be where the games are. And so right now we are very heavily focused, like we have our hands full with our subnet and with the Immutable ZK EVM. I think that's the largest reason why we also did the collaboration with Immutable is, like I said, there's a lot of games there. There's a lot of gamers there. And Immutable has great tooling, but they don't want to be focusing on every single aspect of their chain, of the ZK EVM themselves as well. they don't, for example, didn't want to do the marketplace themselves, and there's different parties there, but we feel that Sphere, because it is 100% focused on gaming and it has those customizable experiences, is going to really resonate with a lot of game studios that are building on the ZK EVM, that are looking at it and might be like, wow, I want this to be my marketplace for our NFTs. And yeah, we can now welcome them. And potentially in the future, who knows, maybe we will support different environments as well. But like I said, I think for now we'll for quite a while have our hands full with the ZK EVM and the subnet on Avalanche.
Jared, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the DAO. I'm looking up some stats here from the ECB, the European Central Bank, and at the end of 2021, they had 4,000. This is their their statistics and their data. At the end of 2021, they had 4,227 DAOs. By the end of 2022, they had 10,572 DAOs. Interestingly, they calculate the rough value of about 16 billion at the end of 21. The end of 22, however, it was 8.8 billion. So you had more DAOs, less value, obviously, because of the market. And then at the end of 2022 to June of 2023, they haven't updated this yet for the end of 2023. It went from 8.8 billion to 18.5, and it went from 10,005 to 12,000, kind of a small increase. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how you created the DAO, sort of what kind of decisions with you in the beginning when you said, hey, let's get a DAO. How much power did you want to give the people in the DAO? And how did you want to get them involved, whether it was a token or an NFT? And, what kind of decisions did you want the DAO to make? And what kind of decisions did you want to sort of hold back? Meaning, do we give too much power to the sort of the democracy of it? And what do we hold back? And I was just curious how, in the beginning, when you decided to do the DAO, how you decided those sort of larger questions of how you implemented it and sort of what the direction of it was.
I think that's you might actually be the first person to ask me this in that on the DAO side, like how did we do that? And I think that's a very interesting topic to talk about, also because a lot of DAOs do this differently. And for us, I think one of the things that I mentioned earlier is everything that we wanted to do with the DAO would would be relying on the token. Like not equity, not a split incentive model. We want all value accrual and the whole ecosystem to be around the token, because we want the power and the decision making to be in the people's hands. And so from day one, as soon as this token, was launched, we had, an early round, then the public round. We immediately set up the multi-sig treasury. The multi-sig signers were from day one decentralized, where the majority were external people, if you will, beyond just Mark, Tommy, and myself, because we wanted to show we're actually a DAO from day one, and this is how we want to operate, with that transparency and with that ownership in the hands of the people. So if there would be a proposal that says, hey, we're going to do this, and majority votes, you actually know that the multi-sig signers will execute upon that, rather than us, the three of us saying no and having the power to say no. So from day one, we kind of already gave away all of the keys to the castle to the people. And that for us also felt the most reasonable. It's not our money with what we can just do what we want. No, it is the treasury, it is the DAO that we want to create something long-term with. And so we can go back to the decision making, what kind of decision can and cannot be made. I'll say this, we're not going to do anything that is illegal. If there's a DAO proposal that tells me, hey, go rob a bank or something like that, we wouldn't do that. So anything that would be in essence legal, that would violate contracts that we might have signed, or structures that we have in place, we don't want to do that. We want to be operating in a good, compliant manner with transparency. So I'll say that. And yeah, that's been like that from day one. And I think as soon as this token came and it got into more people's hands, that's also when we immediately saw those mandates be introduced with, okay, you can only invest up to $1 million before you have to create a proposal if you invest more in one party. That was not our idea. It was the DAO immediately coming with those kind of proposals and mandates. And that showed to us like really cool that we are not the only one caring about this. There are people that are holding those tokens that put in the effort to create those proposals, that really think about the longevity of the DAO and want to help to contribute to this. And the same went to the second DAO proposal, which was about, okay, but then if you have invested, how should de-risking look like? When should you de-risk? And what should that value accrual like? So then they introduced like a burning mechanism where a part of the tokens that needs to be burned, a part goes back to the treasury. That's all comes back to the value accrual back in one token and one ecosystem. Did I answer all of your questions there, or did I miss one?
No, that's fantastic. I was really interested in sort of how that evolved. And then my next question is, when you had first the business and then you raised the token and then you moved it to a DAO, what type of legal implementation? I'm a lawyer, so that's kind of my interest in that. That's why I was asking those questions. Did you have an entity set up? Because I know in the ECB or in the EU, and the ECB is pushing for regulations. It's very similar to here in the United States, where there is not I'll call it a federal regulation. There are a couple states in the United States that actually recognize DAOs. And I know Finland was one that was pushing in the EU to recognize DAOs. And that whole structure is still up in the air in sort of every jurisdiction. So I'm curious, here in the United States, there's actually 2 states and another one that's coming on board where you can actually create what's called a DAO. And I know that is not necessarily the case everywhere, especially in the EU. So is it, what type of structure is it, or is it just all on chain? I mean, that is all obviously another option as well.
No, it is not all just on chain. Like I said, we want to do everything compliant. And so the first thing we did, even before that, smaller raise, we talked with very good lawyers and legal parties to make sure that this raise was, for the seat, which was with the VCs, was operated in a legal matter and compliant. And then as soon as the DAO structure came into place, obviously a majority is going to be on chain. But with, for example, investments, you have to sign contracts. So there are going to be entities involved with that. Now, what it looks like today is it's a lot of lobbying. It's a lot of looking for options to continue to be fully compliant. The landscape is shifting so fast within the EU, outside of the EU. The DAO is obviously global with people from all over the world. So we still have those legal people on our end just plugging day in, day out to make sure that all of that is going to be good. And I think, the whole legal side, to me, I'm not a lawyer and it's not my field of expertise. It's mainly been Tommy together with a bunch of lawyers and the external legal parties as well that have been doing all of those entities and setups, I would say, where I think actually quite a bit of this information might be in the good book that we have. I'll double check that just so I can let you know. But if there's not, I think, if people have questions about that as well, we're always happy to answer them. I might just not be the perfect person to talk to give you all the fine details. I'll say that.
No, fantastic. I appreciate it. And, a lot of DAOs, I think, suffer from a lot of different things. And I'm really impressed with the way that yours is working and how well it's working and all of the people working together for the common good, which is the whole premise behind it. And I think you're doing a great job on that. I appreciate the insight.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I think, one of the most important things for me is that I just want to build cool stuff. I don't want to have to look over my shoulders and be afraid of, is this, what we're doing the right thing? So that's why we take such a heavy consideration and why we took all of those external legal parties and also, core contributors. There's a couple lawyers in there as well that are putting so much time and effort into this, because we want to do this the right way. We are here for the long run, and we're not here to just, do this for the short term and be gone after one, fun cycle, if you will.
Oh yeah, we've certainly found that money spent on lawyers and tax accountants are well spent.
Love it. Marco, I want to actually jump back to something you said about in the marketplace where it tracks the item's history and gives stats about that. Immediately what jumped to my mind is esports and how crazy fun that will be. Like, imagine your favorite esports competitor goes in and kills the number 2 esports competitor with this special sword. That's now marked in the history of the sword on chain forever. And that will be like catching Michael Jordan's basketball shoes that he played in the championships, the Bulls 94, whatever it was. You know what I mean? Like that to me is reminiscent of that and adds so much character and culture into the space. All that to say, are you guys thinking about it from the perspective of esports and big names that come in and they bring their own force of somebody that's just redefining culture? Like somebody like I mean, you guys already know, somebody that's a big enough name with enough influence and culture, they move things, they make things happen. How are you guys thinking about esports in relation to that?
Yeah.
In relation to what you're building, and maybe that could be a segue into how you're thinking about esports and Web3 as a whole.
Yeah, so I'll start by saying, when I mentioned the thing about the sword, likely that's not going to be immediately into the marketplace, but it's a really great idea that we've had multiple people talk about. I've been thinking about it really since March when MapleStory came with kind of this ecosystem that they wanted to build in Web3, where I'm like, guys, I want to see this in the marketplace. So we'll be there eventually. I mean, I'm pretty sure it will. It might just take time, because here's the thing. For a lot of that information, you rely on data that comes directly from the game itself, like from the game studios. I think one of the things that I struggled with initially, and which was a year ago, I'd say, before even Beam, we already had a content platform, like a gaming platform, where we had a lot of gaming content. And I wanted to show player data there and things like that. And I would be reaching out to game studios, asking them, hey, do you have an API that we could connect with? We even had the idea of building our own SDK to get, make it easier for game studios to give us a lot of data. But matter of fact, like I said earlier, not a lot of games had launched yet, let alone that they had thought about stuff like this. So I think with some of the ideas that excite me, we might be a little bit too premature still. You just giving this example about the esports side, that's something that I actually hadn't thought about personally yet. So thanks for that idea. I actually find it pretty cool as well that you could think about, hey, maybe you have like Ninja back, in the day in the Fortnite, win a tournament with a special weapon. And now that weapon is more, hey, this weapon was used in the finals and was the final, responsible for the final kill in that match. That could be really cool information to have and offer collectability where people might be like, I want to have that weapon because I want to be like Ninja, for example. And I think the esports side on Web3 in general, it really fascinates me, and I see a lot of opportunities there. I also think that when I talk here about esport, I think it could come to a larger crowd and be available for a larger crowd than it was before. Because one of the struggles when you organize tournaments and you have, for example, some prize money is if you do that through a PayPal or a bank, and it's worldwide, it costs a lot of money to do those transfers that you might not be able to do this with smaller prize pools. So it only is the top of the, top-notch players that get to participate in those kind of tournaments and the streaming and whatnot. I think what's really cool about Web3, where a lot of things are so cheap and instantly, sent across the globe, is that you can now host and enable more and more people to join and participate in esports tournaments, to join on the streaming side, to join on the content creation side, and run with it. I really see this could, just run with it itself. I could see, like right now in Fortnite, you had the player generated maps or game modes. I think the Lego one is by Fortnite itself, but there was this tweet that I saw that if that had been, user generated content, then based on the daily active users right now on the Epic Game Store, I think it would have yielded between $1 and $4 million per day. Now, if you think and take this back to the Web3 side, where it's all about player-owned economies. It's all about user-generated content, most likely in the future, where people run with things and through the smart contracts, you should still know kind of who owns what IP, for example, and how this interoperability really works. But I just see such amazing opportunities here where right now this goes back to probably premature, but I could very well see this happen. And maybe it brings some new life to and definition to esports as well. I think on some aspects, they've been seeing declining numbers. And obviously the model very largely right now relies on sponsorships. And maybe that changes where it's, organized differently and more locally, for example, or at smaller capacities, if you will.
I mean, this idea can be scaled up, and you can get really like. There's so many cool things that could happen. For example, let's say you have user generated skins or something for a new sword or a new character, cosmetic, whatever it is, right? Like instead of having it just be like, okay, now we're just tracking the stats on this one sword, why can't it be, oh, we as a community are going to bet on this cosmetic, and we're essentially like, like player owned sponsoring or like community based sponsoring of different cosmetics where they kind of buy into a share of the future royalties for that cosmetic. And then they push that, and that can go on, and that's a product in and of itself. So then you have like community based or community incubated ideas that can get tested out in games. Or like you were saying, that a mod of a specific base game, right? Like something like if we look back at like Warcraft 3 Frozen Throne, and they have all of their special custom games. I mean, that's where you got League of Legends from. That's where you got Dota from. That's where all those things spawned from. Was a mod of the base game. It was a custom mod of the base game created by the community, right? So like, what if you could have the community creating that and betting on that, and in exchange they get a certain cut of the revenue for helping to build that out, enforced by smart contracts. That to me is where what you guys are talking about now, that's the logical conclusion of that, which really gives power back to the players. And like, user generated content is not just this cool like fan art that they post once and it goes viral and they look really cool online. Like, this could be how they make their mark on the future of society, because if a game gets big enough or a digital realm becomes influential enough, then the people that have helped to bring that about, like that becomes very real very fast, and it gives back the power to the people who created it and had the creativity and who put in the work and time and effort to make that happen. It gives them their fair shake, and it's like hard coded in to where they can't get that taken away from them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing that you could think of that we hadn't touched upon is, what if you have game streamers that have their own community? I mean, you already kind of mentioned, their own community spinning up their own NFTs. It could be the same for influencers or streamers where they're like, hey, I love this game. I love playing this game. I want to have my own skin for my own community in that game. And, the streamer now get incentivized based on, for example, a part of the fees that are generated through those sales of those custom NFTs. Those kind of things could work as well, where maybe this enables the game studio to be more efficient with their marketing budget as well, because now you're not doing the sponsorship kind of thing. It's based on actually revenue going back to the game studio and the ecosystem, where now a part of that is split with the streamer based on what they bring in. Whereas there's transparency for the players. They know what split is going back to the content creator. They know what split is going to the game studio. We can see what the game studio is actually going back into more content creation for the game, or is it going in the pockets of the studio as profits where it might not be going back to additional content creation. I think all of those things are also going to trigger more opportunities, possibilities, and again, transparency, which I think one of the major benefits of using blockchain technology is it goes back to that open ledger, aspect.
Yeah, and I think an interesting merger there just between both of the topics that you guys were discussing and how they interact is, the esports model for tournaments has been, hey, we have a big prize pool, and if you win it, we'll distribute it, where it's going to open up this whole paradigm from the influencer streamer piece and the esports stars, the user generated content, and the ability to do wagers where, hey, I'm handling the sort of technicals of the event. Like, I'll handle distribution as far as getting it out on all these different channels, but you're actually, each of your communities is coming and racing for pink slips or fighting for pink slips. And what you might be fighting for is, the gun that your whole community has come together and created this really cool, whatever, Dr. Disrespect M4, and you're playing Nick Merckx's community for their custom M4. And so you completely change the paradigm where the users are getting sort of a benefit because they could be, sourcing the content from their communities. The competitors get the plug. The event hosters aren't completely just bringing all of the money to the table. So you're just bringing all of the power and flexibility of an economy to the gaming world, and then the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, and I like the idea too of using something like Beam where you have a lot of different games on it. And perhaps, like you're saying, that M4 could not only be used for this game, but it's very interchangeable with all the other games on there. And I think that sort of expands it. It makes it a lot more interesting of a proposal, which to me is one of the selling points for using something like Beam. That to me is great.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really have enjoyed seeing in the Beam ecosystem is that there's a lot of different genres there. There's a lot of different games there. And we obviously have this founders community where different founders and key people of the teams, of the studios are talking with each other. And we see so much like brainstorming going back and forward. Or if they're hiring, they will use that chat to say, hey, does anyone have any good people for that? Kind of like what's happening in the Neo Tokyo community as well, right? You have this really core group of people that is sharing knowledge and network with each other. And that also goes to, studios now saying, hey, we have those NFTs in the games. Might it be interesting that we look at implementing some of yours and ours and vice versa? I think interoperability, in my opinion, is something very interesting. I think it's also very risky because you have to think about how do you balance items? How is this really going to look in my game versus yours? Like, is it doing the NFT or the graphics justice? Or, for example, if you have a game that is an Unreal Engine versus a game that is in Unity and very, retro vibes, you have a really big difference in what the weapons or characters will look like in each other games. And I mean, I'm here for it. I'm very excited to see when we're going to see more of that and what that's going to look like for sure.
Yeah, and I think that just is a perfect tee up for AI, where you're just taking other sort of, styles. Hey, take this gun, but make it for the rules of Call of Duty, or this skin, make sure, the head size is correct. All the hit markers are going to be correct. That's where, sort of AI really shines. And I'm super excited to see how that, enables interoperability.
Yeah, absolutely. I think AI, I mean, that's pretty worth having a whole separate conversation about in general. I think it's amazing to see what has done this year. I mean, if I compare my thoughts on AI in gaming from way early in 2023 compared to what I think now, I'm like, wow, I've seen what it can do in just 1 year and how it just goes forward. I'm very curious to see what that's going to look like in 2024 for the gaming industry. It might have a really significant impact. Or probably will have, better said.
Yeah, 100%.
I love it, guys. Well, hey, Marco, I know you have a hard stop here, so I want to be respectful of your time and so very grateful for the time you have shared with us. Just kind of want to hand you the floor and see if you have any last parting thoughts. Obviously, we're just beyond happy that you guys have joined Neo Tokyo and that you're fellow citizens and you're part of everything we're building here. I think it's a dream come true that we're all building together, and we truly are creating the future of this industry. So, I want to thank you for that, recognize you for that. Thank you for your time, and maybe give you the floor here for your last sign off.
Sounds good. Yeah, no, I appreciate the invitation to be on here tonight. I mean, Mark has mainly got the insights in the Discord server, and he has nothing but praise for how the conversations and chatting is going there. It feels like right down his alley. And I think, I'm just, enjoying the conversations like we're having them right now. It's really fun. I think, one of the things that we really stand for is collaboration in the industry because it's so small still. And we're having so many like-minded people that why not collaborate? There's so many options and opportunities to do so. And I think, if you're listening to this today and you've enjoyed it, please follow Merit Circle, obviously, on Twitter. Maybe join our Telegram if you want to chat a bit more with us. We're honestly in that Telegram group throughout the whole day. We like to chat with everyone. I think we have a very open and fun culture for people to just come in and say hi. And yeah, like I said earlier too, we are also co-launching a game, which is going to be Forgotten Playland. I think on both the Beam side and the Forgotten Playland side, I think, there's tons of stuff happening right now in the kitchen. And I'm just super excited to keep sharing more of that throughout even this month still. Like, we're not sitting still. and throughout next month, I think it's just going to be a windmill of information and cool stuff that's happening. So yeah, thanks again for having me tonight.
Awesome, you're the man. Appreciate you. Thank you very much. And
thanks,
yeah,
Marco.
we'll see you next time.
All right,
Yeah,
sounds
thanks,
good.
Marco.
Yeah, have a good day.